Service Committee, and Jim is a teacher at UCD, and he also founded the Romero Theater Troupe. Now in July and August, they were in Peru this summer, and they had a theater workshop. They had the honor of leading a theater workshop with Plataforma Institucional Salendina. This is a group that formed to resist the conga mine that Newmont Mining is hoping to build in Peru. Newmont Mining already has Yanacocha Mine in Cajamarca, Peru, but they're hoping to build this other mine that will be 3 times the size of Yanacocha Mine. So I have a little excerpt from Linda Salon. She's a volunteer with the Plataforma group, the group that they had a theater workshop with. And I'm going to let you hear a little bit of her reaction to their presence in Salon. Gabriela and Jim here was a fantastic experience. The people who participated in the theater workshop both enjoyed and benefited greatly. The mere presence of Gabriela and Jim showed the community that they are not alone in their struggle. And to hear that the mine had done terrible things in the U.S. also alleviated somewhat the feeling of victimization that at times they feel. Mega mining tramples over everyone's rights, not just us. The theater was in part a light relief from the serious meetings we usually have, and in part not so light as emotions resurfaced that were already so close to the surface. Given that just a year had passed since the most intense oppression of the protests, where 5 community members had died. The majority of theater pieces portrayed this, their deepest scar, which was obviously far from healed. So this was an opportunity to release some of the trauma in a controlled environment, but it also showed their continued hope and courage, despite all that they had suffered. So on behalf of the people of Salon, I'd like to thank Jim and Gabriela for the wonderful experience. So the people in Salon were very moved by having Gabriela and Jim. So now we'll let them go ahead and speak and tell us about what they learned.
Well, it's great to see everyone here tonight. Anyone have any ideas on it? Okay. So Jim, I'll need you to. So as Gabriela said, Jim and I had the honor of spending a little over 2 months in Peru, and we were based actually in northern Peru in Chachapoyas, in the region of the Amazons. But we really wanted to make it to Cajamarca because Jim is a historian, and it's a really important place in the history of Peru, but all of South America and the conquista and the devastation that happened to the indigenous people. Additionally, DJPC has been involved in fighting Newmont mining and being in support and solidarity with the communities in Cajamarca. And 3 years ago, we gave our Global Peace and Justice Award to the Group Fides, which is a group that has been working in solidarity with communities that have been impacted by Newmont mining there and those that are resisting it, providing legal support and community organizing. And so we met up with Mirta again, met her husband, her daughter, and learned more about their work. And the most impactful thing for us was going to the community of Salendin and meeting with the group members of the Plataforma Institucional Salendina, and really leaving with the sense that we have so much to learn from them, and that their struggle of resistance is honorable, powerful, and beautiful, and how can we be in partnership with that, and how can we learn from them to also fight the same type of minings that are happening here in the U.S. Cajamarca was one of the centers of the Inca Empire, and it was actually Pizarro was murdered there in the struggle, the Spanish thirst for gold. And so that struggle continues today, where at that time it was the Spanish conquerors who came in and massacred the indigenous people in the quest for gold. Today, it is now transnational corporations, and among them, US-based, actually in Golden, Newmont Mining, that are, in their own ways, directly massacring in local communities, indigenous and mestizo populations, in their thirst for gold, which has resulted from mercury spills, from depletion of water, poisoning of water systems, among other, and also direct violence in communities, which we'll hear a little bit more about. And so the Yanacocha mine has been in existence for many years. It's actually on the decline. And we saw a small taste of that simply going about 20 minutes outside of the city of Cajamarca, which is this beautiful historic city. And you go just a few miles out and you have the Yanacocha mine, which has taken down mountaintops. Currently in the world, there are basically no longer big chunks of gold. What they're doing is peeling off mountaintops, crushing the earth, and watering it with cyanide to leach out the gold, and setting up these leach plains. So it uses huge amounts of water and then pollutes the water with the cyanide and destroys the mountaintops and devastates the communities that are in the area and those that are surrounding because of the water. This sign here, as you're going into the area, it said, in Yanacocha, yes, we take care of the environment. And I think we have a very interesting way of taking care of the environment, which is devastating the mountaintops and turning this beautiful Andean mountain region into areas that are being poisoned and are having big environmental problems because of that. But because of that reality, go ahead.
To point something out of here, everyone, this difference in mentality between Newmont and the local communities, it really is that. It really is just a complete difference in mentality. The communities started complaining that they can no longer walk to town from their smaller communities. They can't walk into Cajamarca because the mine has taken all the land and their pathways have been destroyed. So Newmont's solution to that, you can see it here, was to build a corridor with these barbed wire fences on either side where the people could have a joyful walk into town. And the people couldn't believe that this was their solution. And to Newmont, it made complete sense. Yeah, here you go. There's 1 mile. You're right in town. And I think that exemplifies the difference in mentality that this problem is really all about.
But along with the history of exploitation and devastation for gold, there's also a long history of resistance in Cajamarca. There was a resistance to the Incas coming in and conquering the indigenous people. There was a resistance to the Spanish coming in and conquering the indigenous and Inca people. And that resistance continues today, and this is on a very prominent mountainside as you're overlooking the main beautiful plaza of Cajamarca. You see No a Conga, and Conga is, as Adriana mentioned, is the new mine that they want to build. And that would be in Salon is around the area where it would be. And so this resistance is very, very prominent. And we saw it both in the city of Cajamarca and in Salon. And had we traveled around other places, I'm sure we would have also seen it. We saw it on mountainsides and then on different art on walls throughout the city. So this says, vida sí, vida no, life yes, mining no. And this says, we do not want a minute of silence for those who have died. All of the struggle is our memory. No, the Conga no va. Conga's not going to happen. So this idea that lives have been lost, either directly or indirectly, by mining and by resisting, and that's not what people want.
It's great to see so many people come out here. So when we arrived in Cajamarca, we saw these signs posted everywhere about a demonstration. And we thought, oh, great, we can go and be part of this action and participate and meet people that way. And then we realized that this wasn't a demonstration against the mine, this was a rally for the mine. And having grown up in Appalachia, I know how that works and how the coal companies in Appalachia are able to sort of twist things around and rally people, particularly their employees and their families who depend on their wages, to come out in the streets and rally and make it seem as if the community actually supports the mine. And that's what this was, I mean, you can see how the wording was done I mean, the best PR specialist in the world couldn't have come up with this. It's about work, it's about prosperity. I think one of the ones I saw, I swear I saw it, was a march for peace and dignity. And so these words were sort of, both sides were sort of wrestling over ownership of these words. And so we don't know how large this demonstration was or how many people came out for it because we had to leave before it happened.
But it was really interesting because, as we said, the mine is on the decline. So the mine will eventually be closing, but the impacts of the mine will continue for generations and generations. And so this march was people, we had a cab driver, interestingly enough, who we went with, Mirta, who we traveled with to see the mines. He was actually planning to go to this rally. He had no idea that it was organized by the mine because the whole idea was the mine is on decline, and so while they bring in a lot of outside people to work in the mines, and so it hasn't necessarily skyrocketed employment. There are local folks who are employed, and a lot of those folks have been laid off. So unemployment is very high rates. Poverty, despite the fact of all the wealth being taken out of the community, poverty rates are incredibly high. And so he was going because the taxi driver believed this was in promotion of jobs, and you can notice it says against corruption, which there's huge corruption that allows the mining companies to not actually have to fully clean the water. This testing of the city water ends because the mines give influence the local city politics. And from Cajamarca to Salon, it's about a 3-hour ride, and it's a beautiful, incredible traversing through the mountains, which we did in a taxi with 5 other people and a load of frozen fish to deliver to some road construction work that was going on. So Lily kept commenting on the fish that were with us. But along the way, we started noticing water tanks. They were bright green, yellow water tanks that were on individual houses. And so I asked our cab driver, what are those and what's that about? And they said that it wasn't actually Newmont, it was a different mining company, had bought them for the local people because they wanted to be putting a mine in that area. And so it was a way to buy off the local communities before they started the mining process. And this was very common. And this is not unique to Peru. This happens in Appalachia. This happens in, with fracking here in Colorado and these kinds of things. But it was very interesting, very purposeful, targeted households that were given something that were then considered that they were not going to protest the mines. So Salon is a beautiful rural community in the Andes with folks where different places you go in Cajamarca, you have different hats that represent the people. And it's just a beautiful community. And we met Milton here, who was he started working, he was head of the Plataforma Interinstitucional Salendina, and this had started 4 years ago, and he had said that he thought they would work for a few months to fight the mine, and here it is 4 years later, and they're still pushing for that. So we met Milton and Linda, who we mentioned that we do these theater workshops, and they said, well, what? And we talked to them. I said, yeah, why don't you come to Salon? And they said, we will probably have, it's kind of last minute, it's the middle of the week. I think it was actually, and so there'll probably just be, 20, 25 people there. Needless to say, we ended up with about 100 folks there.
So I want to talk about the theater workshop because that really was the heart of our experience and the purpose for us being in Salon. I think that what I noticed immediately in Cajamarca and Salon was a community where you could feel a sense of trauma in the community. It reminded me of years past when I've been to Belfast in Derry in Northern Ireland. If a dish breaks in a restaurant, people overreact because they're used to danger and trauma at any drop of a hat. And I felt that in this place as well. We learned about the kinds of tactics that Newmont is using to silence the community through the kind of in loose cooperation with the Peruvian government. And one of those tactics was to hire retired former Peruvian military. And the group was called Forza. And the sense we got was it was sort of the Blackwater of Peru. And so these retired military folks, these are pretty tough, hardcore folks, and they use tactics of military intelligence and surveillance to intimidate the community. All the attorneys and activists that we worked with in Graffitis, they had been followed, harassed, videotaped. They couldn't leave their houses or their workplaces without someone following and videotaping them. Eventually that was a priest there, most of you know about Father Marco. He helped to expose that. The UN actually did an investigation into that and found that Newmont was responsible somewhat, even though they tried to wash their hands of it and say we didn't hire those people. Forza also participated in torturing of activists. Serious torture, not just minor league stuff. It was really serious stuff. And so that was something we noticed there.
Hey Jim, could I just, if you haven't seen the film, The Devil Operation, it is all about, it's called The Devil Operation, and DJPC, we showed it, but it's available online. We watched it for free online in Peru. I don't know if you can watch it for free here, but it's a really great movie that talks all about Fuerza following Graffitis folks and the impacts it had, and it's really powerful. And then the other thing is DJPC has been working for years, has had a petition to try to get Fuerza not to work with Newmont anymore. And they actually are not, because they've changed their name to something else. And so under a different name, they're still working for the mining companies. Similar to other types of groups. And also, sorry, some of those former military folks were trained in the School of the Americas. So again, we see these threads of the issues that Denver Justice and Peace Committee has worked on, the issues that we need to continue to work on, that are the intersection of violence, militarism, and corporate control, and how they play out in communities.
So it was a very close network of activists because they had been through this really horrific experience of not being able to trust walking on the street, feeling for the safety of their lives every day. And we felt very privileged that they welcomed us into meetings and we got to talk to them and got to know them. We felt incredibly privileged. And so we didn't plan to go to Salon, but we had this opportunity and we took it. And the night came of our workshop. I had explained the work we do in the Romero troupe and how we try to do workshops and empower people to tell their stories as both a cathartic and an empowering experience. And how that's built on the work of Augusto Boal in Theater of the Oppressed, and the work of Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And so they were really enthusiastic, they wanted to do this, so we ended up in a teachers union. One of the things I love about Peru, the teachers unions are strong. They are strong. You don't mess with the teachers down there. And yeah, in Mexico, it's happening today. I mean, it's some really courageous, strong, they have a real power about them. And so we ended up in the Teachers Union Hall. That's the murals you see behind the folks in this Teachers Union Hall, and it was a massive space. And so we said, all right, so we arranged 20 chairs in a circle, expecting a small turnout. And we started asking people to go around and introduce themselves. So what happened is the trickle turned into a flood. People just kept coming. And the circle just kept expanding. And so the introductions took an hour and 15 minutes to get back to us because it had grown to 100 people. And Gabriela leaned over and she said, "What? I think we might have to bail out on the theater. It's getting late." So we talked about it, and we said, "No, we have to do this. We have to do this." So we did a really fast, we gave them 15 minutes in groups of about 12 to create a play about a story that they had experienced that represents resistance in their communities, represents empowerment and organizing in their communities. And we had no idea what to expect. The introductions, they weren't just, "Hi, I'm Bob, I'm glad to be here," blah. Some of them were people standing and giving 10-minute soliloquies on how passionate they feel about the issue. Tears were flowing. People were angry. It was really something else. I mean, we knew we were in we had this privilege of being in this really amazing space that night. So that flowed right into the plays. Sometimes when you do a workshop like this and people don't know each other, it's kind of stiff and people aren't really outgoing. We didn't have to worry about that at all. I ended up in a group and they were speaking so quickly. My Spanish had really improved so much and I was so proud of myself. They were speaking so quickly I couldn't understand, so all I knew was I was the mayor. I had no idea what the play was about. Beyond that, I learned later. So what we thought we'd do is share some clips of the plays. We want you to experience this. And the night took on a magic of its own. The plays went on for there were 6 plays. The plays themselves took about 45 minutes. And then, when that much happens in a room in a night, you can't just say, "Okay, thanks for coming, see you."
Yeah.
You've all been there in places like that where there's just the room's full of life and energy. So we had a moment of silence to kind of honor the victims that had died, and there were people there whose daughters and sons and family members had been killed. And so after that, people just started one at a time giving speeches. And that went on for another 45 minutes. So I want to just read a couple of quick quotes before we play these clips. Augusto Boal, if you're not familiar with him, Theater of the Oppressed is his piece. And this really is the idea that if you can act it out on stage, you can act it out in life. So here we go. This is his most famous quote. "It's forbidden to walk on the grass. It's not forbidden to fly over the grass." Theater of the Oppressed has no end, because everything that happens in it must extend into life. If the show starts in fiction, its objective is to become fully integrated into life, into nonfiction. When does a session of Theater of the Oppressed end? Never. Its purpose is to encourage autonomous activity, to set a process in motion, to stimulate transformation and creativity, to change spectators into protagonists. Precisely for these reasons, Theater of the Oppressed should be the initiator of change, the culmination of which is not the aesthetic phenomenon, but real life. So there's a taste of Augusto Boal. Enjoy, everyone. Gabriela will give you maybe a little bit of context about it. We're going to show you a very short clip, and then we're going to show you a more longer, maybe 10-minute clip.
We had 6 groups, and actually 5 of the 6 groups ended up doing plays about the peaceful protests that they had planned, that they had just commemorated a few weeks before, where police had come in and 5 people, including children, had been massacred. And so, and 2 of the groups actually decided to join forces and combine their things. So it was very, very intense and powerful, and something that, and what was really powerful is that the audience, those who were, well, the others ended up becoming part of the play also, because everyone there had lived it and experienced it. So
Augusto Boal would have been so proud. Sticks became guns, chairs became dams and shields, I mean, this was the ultimate organic theater, everybody.
And just to let you know, the acoustics in the teachers' union hall are not very good, so it's hard to understand the words, but the words don't really matter. What you get is the feeling.
Right.
So.
The other great thing that happened is people who weren't in the group just decided that they were going to join the play.
Nice.
And they just jumped into the play, and then people said, oh, cool, let's go.
I'm going to move this forward. So this was the group that I was in. And in the group was a woman whose son had been murdered that day. And no, sorry, not the day of the protest. Not that day. It was a little over a year ago. And I realized my first inkling would be to shy away from dealing with that it's too much for people to handle. And she was the one who actually led the charge that's what their play should be. That's what our play should be about. And what you'll see, what happened was so they were peacefully protesting. The police came in and started tear gassing and attacking them. And so they went into a church, and this becomes the church. She was in the church when she found out that her son had been shot. And she ended up she was in the church for 8 hours. She wasn't able to leave the church for 8 hours, not knowing what had happened to her son. And so the play, as the play is being acting out, you see that they actually kind of get stuck in the church again. It was sort of like as far as theater flows, we should be moving on, but she kept staying in that church, and they had to go and call the priest to come in and to allow them to go out and for her to see what happened to her son. And so you'll notice that those of us who are acting in the play are kind of stuck over here, the audience starts lying down, and 5 people, including a young boy, lies down and plays the role of those who were murdered that day. So that's
Completely spontaneous.
Yeah, that wasn't.
Wow.
As you watch this, see if you can pick up the sense of catharsis that happens through theater. talked to everyone. The woman who had lost her son, she spoke to everyone, and it was a very powerful thing to witness that. The play went on and on. They just kept going, even though they hadn't planned on any of the ending being around the bodies. None of that had been planned, but it just went and went and went because the whole community was involved in reenacting this event, because it was a cleansing, it was a catharsis, and so we were just our eyes kept meeting throughout the night. You know, it was just the realization that we were very privileged. So, should we open things up?
Well, I think we'll say a couple of things, and then usually what happens, we usually, unless we want to derivate, we usually take a break and then, but I think too, again, the speeches that came out and the talks, and there was spontaneous poetry that happened after the plays also, and a lot of it was centered around water and the future of the children. And seeing what had happened, there was clear evidence of what happened with Yanacocha, and communities knew this is not what they wanted happening with them. And part of the reason too that we wanted to do this presentation was because that we said we would share their stories, and that these stories would not stay there, and that people would know what was happening. And also the incredible spirit of resistance and resilience, that a mother could get up only a year later and act out and lead a group to talk about losing her son is really amazing. And the resistance, and that I feel like, again, mining and the impacts, whether it be gold mining, whether it be fracking, whether it be mountaintop removal in Appalachia, this is happening worldwide. Often those who are poorest and who are most marginalized feel the worst impacts, but it's happening across the board, and I feel like we have so much to learn from the people in Peru who have organized. We have organizing here in the US, but it tends to be more isolated pockets, and that they are, and so I feel we also have so much to learn from them. And just another point that was really powerful, and when we met with Grufides, the group that's working with them, and what they were saying, what's so important is for people also to understand in Peru, and those who are impacted by mining, that mining hasn't been this beautiful thing in the United States, because Newmont talks about, well, it's the cornerstone of what has built the United States prosperity, and the fact that there's a middle class and that people, this whole thing. And so Jim gave kind of a background on mining in the United States related with his research, and that was really powerful for people to hear. No, that's propaganda too on that side, and that is not the reality here. And we're still cleaning up, gold mining that happened in the late 1800s in Leadville. That's not cleaned up, and the kind of tactics that are happening we watched, while we were watching movies about Peru while we were there, but we also watched Gasland 2 while we were there. And it was just like that, the night we watched it, I couldn't really sleep very well. I have insomnia, but it was worse than usual. Because of the use of labeling people who are working against fracking as eco-terrorists and as using military tactics was just eerily reminiscent of what Fuerza was doing with people, and those kinds of, that way of marginalizing people who are standing up for their children's future and for their communities by labeling them as extremists is something that's happening in the worldwide, and that's why we must work together, and we must talk about these as global issues. And while what's happening in Cajamarca is also our responsibility, because Newmont is down the road from us. And so I think there's so many ways to connect on this issue. And so we just felt so privileged to be to be there in the community and be a part of that. And before we go to break, I did want to just mention one other thing. In the video, there was a young guy who was next to me he was one of the soldiers with a chair. His name is Jorge, and he's an environmental studies student, and his family runs a hostel that we stayed in while we were there. And he is an environmental studies student, but he's also reporting on what they're doing what the mining impacts are and what Newmont and other miners are doing. And he was taken in by the local police and interrogated and roughed up and had minor torture going on with him. And it was through connections with with human rights groups and with graffitists that he got out without being pretty traumatized, but not being horribly injured. And he is still continuing to report on it. And that's where just incredible inspiration from people of all ages who are saying, no, this is not okay, and we're not going to sit back and stand for it. Instead, we're going to really speak out. So it's really, really powerful.
Well, I think we're going to take a short break and then come back with questions and discussion. Sorry?
We'll form a circle.
Yeah, we'll form a circle. And there are a lot of people here actually who know way more than we do about the details about Newmont mining, because DJPC has a mine watch group that has been doing a lot of research on Newmont and things like that. So I think it's also a time to talk about Salon and also have other folks answer questions about specifics about.
You have 15 minutes to create a play.
The floor is open for any questions, any comments, or anything that's concerning.
I have a question. Gabriela, how successful are the company people over there in wooing the community members? You know, are they succeeding in fooling everybody? To what extent?
I would say there are people, not a terribly large extent. I mean, obviously there was like our cab driver who lived in Cajamarca, which is impacted, but a little less directly. They're going to go up. Who had concerns about the mine, but also think there's a need for jobs. But I think because of the reality of what's happening, there are a lot of folks who really, like, it's right there in front of people, and they're pushing back. There are people who have been, the mine is doing a really big effort to kind of buy people off, like we talked about with the water tanks. And we didn't meet with those communities, so I don't know firsthand what their experiences are. I do know from the Yanacocha mine, there's a farmer there who is very close with the mine there, and he ends up serving as when the mine wants to show that it's really not having an impact, they go to that farm and they have a area where they raise fish, and they talk about how actually there's not water pollution, they're raising fish in its mine. It turns out that actually the water that they use for the fish is pumped in from an area that's not coming from the mine, and they don't share that piece. But that family and that is held up as showing there are people who prove that there's no impact of the mining, and they very much support it and believe in it. And so those kinds of people tend to have strong ties with them. I don't know, and I think it would be very interesting to talk with those communities that are receiving the water tanks that are coming in. What is their response? But within, and even within Salon, I'm sure and actually maybe Robin can address this question a little bit. But there is tension for sure. I mean, people who are, like for example, the hostel that we were staying in Jorge and his family, because they've had direct police brutality, people are protective of who they're sharing some information with or what they're opening up about. So,
what do you think the prospects are with this well-organized community protest? Are they succeeding in pushing back Newmont and others?
that is a good question. I just want to introduce Robin. He was actually, and I didn't know this before, I've known Robin for many years, but he was actually there the day of the massacre, he was at the event. And he is from Cusco, but has spent time working with those communities in resistance. And so actually, I think, Robin, if you want to answer that, and before he jumps up, before I have him actually answer the question, I mean, they have, I think Newmont expected to come in and just do this quickly, and they have had the process delayed for 4 years. So there has been success, and as far as a longer term success, Robin, Okay, so he said he'll come back to that if there will go for other questions, and he'll come back and address that point too.
I'm curious about, you mentioned the UN's done a report that Newmont was involved in the beating of, did you say Father Marcos or something else? The Mine Watch Committee would sure like to see that report.
This was in 2007. When Forza was being used and there was ex-military folks who were
With
being used.
Forza, okay.
Yeah, people reached out to the UN and said, can you come in here and take a look at this, what's happening? And as far as I know, as far as I've been able to research and tell, the UN did some investigating and determined that yes, not only were these ex-military people being used, but Newmont was hiring them, even though it denied that it did.
Right, because we've had, of course, a lot of discussions with Newmont about Forza.
Yeah.
But that UN, did you know about that? I didn't know that.
Yes, I think, several things happened. Graffiti actually filed with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, the OAS, and with the help of York University lawyers. And there were other indications that when there was this torture, we saw it in the film actually, wasn't in. There are several films now out. Open Pit is one of them, and Choropampa is another one. That's where the mercury spill was. The Devil Operation. All of these films that we've been watching have shown that at one point there was an investigation into torture, and it showed that the force of people were really from the mine, and that the Newmont is responsible for Forza. It's this kind of use of the police, even locally, and in their trucks to transport the police to these demonstrations that the mine pays for their trucks and these buses. And so there's a lot of relationship going on here. We don't know to the extent that the UN has done anything about it. And they changed the name, as you say. We had a petition going against Forza because they were former Fujimori people or paramilitary. And they just changed the name, like they changed the name of the School of the Americas. They just keep the same track.
Does anyone know if there's a compromise here? Is there a way to mine that is safe for the environment? Obviously there is. If there are mines all over the world that can't be all as bad as the mine, the other mine in Peru. Is there a compromise situation?
I think other people could speak to that. My sense has been that perhaps companies like Newmont think they can get away with more abuses in Peru and in other countries than they can here in the United States, even though there are abuses here in the United States. And I know that Newmont has a great PR campaign to sort of soften the reputation that they have with this. But I knew about this going down there, and I was still shocked that they're getting away with what they are. So.
Basically, there is more sustainable gold mining. I think there's operations in El Salvador, but it's all done by hand, basically. So instead of using these huge tractors and these huge machines to crush rock and then sift it through cyanide solvent, it's people doing it by hand, which of course is incredibly costly. It's a lot more costly given the price of gold. I mean, they're trying to make a profit.
As much as they can.
And I think it's like with any business endeavor is that any corners they can cut increases their profit. I mean, they can build more effective mine tailing ponds. They can keep the water from being polluted. They can do it. It's just less profit margin. And if people don't know about it, You know, what incentive is there for them not to take those extra precautions?
And I think that brings up a point that I always grapple with in learning about human rights issues. The bigger the picture you get, the more issues there are, and especially when you bring in the environmental aspect, is, okay, mining in the way that it's handled and the way that the communication happens is a total human rights violation. And it's very, very bad for the environment, which is also dangerous for people in the community, which is a human rights violation. But what do you do when you have a population surge that needs the materials in the mine, and if they didn't have the materials, there wouldn't be enough energy or water or transportation for the people who are living. Now, I think it would be really great if we all just lived in communes and we didn't use cars and we didn't use plastics or any of the things that we use today that we've grown to be dependent upon. But obviously it could be done differently. But can it not be done is the question. And would that create, if it were stopped, wouldn't that create another human rights issue where we wouldn't have enough resources for people?
I think the issue there is that we're talking about gold. We don't need more gold. We need it for electronics and things, but I think it's been estimated that all the gold that has ever been extracted from the entire world throughout the entire course of history fills about an Olympic-sized pool, which is minuscule. I mean, it's nothing. And so we're just tearing down incredibly important pieces of land to these people, and all the problems we just heard about for really small amounts. So I think the question is, especially with this mine, no, it doesn't really need to be done.
So different types of mines might be argued, but another point there is that wealth is being used to do other things, I'm sure, too. And there's probably a distribution issue with the wealth, but gold generates a ton of wealth, and that's why they're doing it. So then that money, I'm sure, is being used to do other things, which probably trickles down to the rest of the world in some way. Well, I'm not saying that they hand out paychecks, and I'm not arguing for, I'm just creating a dialogue of critical thinking. You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure, I haven't done the study, but I'm sure that money from gold is not just all sitting in a bank account. I'm sure that there's other things done with it, like investments and whatnot.
We've had other presentations on exactly that, and Newmont has promised different community development projects and things like that, and they will post billboards on how much money they're investing in the community, and it's something crazy like 10 million soles, which in the context of how much money is actually being made off of the mine is a pittance.
Yeah.
I think the other thing in struggling with the issue about mining in general in the Mine Watch Committee, we're clear to say that we are not against all mining, and that we don't think this particular mine that they're trying to develop, the Conga mine, should go. But we are asking actually that Newmont adhere to they call their social responsibilities about mining, and they have not done that. They have not followed the environmental studies. They destroyed 4 lakes. The problem is the gold is at the bottom of lakes. There are 4 lakes. They're the waterhead, the headwaters of the 4 rivers that flow into that valley. So our issues with Newmont is particularly that if you state that you have social responsibilities and that you're going to abide by human rights regulations and consult with the indigenous people and get their permission before you do all these things, they violate that over and over and over again. They violated the country's environmental laws. They violated human rights laws. So if companies mine responsibly, then
It'd be different.
we can talk about it.
And that pattern exists in other countries with other
Absolutely.
companies too.
What
It's
Newmont's
not
done in
limited.
Indonesia is, it isn't done here because we have such strong regulations. But the problem, and just to mention that we do have a presentation about Newmont, and what we've called the two faces of Newmont, the face they present to the local community in terms of supporting all of the universities and giving to everything. And, they show themselves as being, tremendously community conscious, but there's another face in Peru and it's very different. And so, that is our main message to them is, and they have done studies, and actually we got one of those about what the community does think and how opposed they are to this and how bad their reputation is there. They know this.
And it's not always cleaned up in this country either. When Ken Salazar was Attorney General here, Newmont had, I believe it was a silver mine on the western slope, and they didn't clean it up, and Ken Salazar said, well, that's okay. So, it's in our backyard. It's not just, in Peru and Salvador.
If I could just veer us a little bit, it's wonderful for me to see so many people, and a lot of young people at this DJPC meeting. A lot of my students are here, and I want to really encourage people to get involved in this organization. Every meeting should be this big. And Newmont knows that people in Peru care about these mines. And Newmont needs to know that more people here care about these mines. And if we can get 50 people to come out on a Thursday night to listen to a talk about gold mines in Peru, I think we can get 500 people on the streets at a well-organized, well-planned event that raises attention and gets loud, and I believe we can do that. And I think maybe we can light a spark tonight and begin building towards something that really has an enormous impact. So I wanted to plant that seed.
Lily's ready.
So, and we give credit, obviously, the accountability in America for mines is not perfect or near perfect, but maybe there's a little bit more here because of the protests and the unions and the hard work of people here, the way that we do organize and communicate.
Yeah, I would actually argue that they're much better organized in Peru than we are here, and that communities have come together because their survival depends on it. And we have some organizing going on here, but we have a lot to learn from that. And I think your question about mining, I think we can have a debate, are there sustainable ways, are there not? And I think there are more sustainable ways. I think there also are questions of, do we really need gold? Do we really need, we use certain things that are extracted aside from gold in our lives, but they don't have to be used. There are much more sustainable ways to make computers, and if there was consumer demand, that would happen. And there is huge wealth produced, but it is not, Cajamarca, Peru is, for 500 years has experienced that, where there's been huge wealth extracted, and actually we've seen a decrease in the standard of living. With Newmont there, poverty has increased. People, there are more people, we heard that over and over from people. And so, just because wealth is extracted doesn't mean it's trickling down to people. And I think that's a whole question, and part of coming back to your question too, Jim, I think a central part of that is, who is deciding what we're mining and whether resources are being extracted from people's communities? And ultimately, I believe it shouldn't be my decision or anyone's decision. It should be the community's decision as to what they want. And we need to shift to that kind of structure, and then decisions can be made, and it's going to be much more sustainable when that's happening. That means some huge shifts in the way we do economics in this country, but I think that's only going to happen if we pull together, like Jim said. I wanted to pass the word to Robin because he is from Peru. He's been active in this struggle. He was there the day that those 5 people were killed. He was at the event, and he's headed to Peru shortly to continue to do some of this organizing. And so he was going to respond to some of those things, and I'm going to interpret for him.
Amigos, compañeros y compañeras,
Friends,
buenas noches.
good evening.
Los nuevos terroristas en el mundo
The new terrorists in the world
somos los que luchamos por la ecología,
are those of us who fight for ecology.
Son los cristianos que luchan por los derechos humanos,
The Christians who fight for human rights,
contra la tortura,
against torture,
y así nos tratan.
and that's how we're treated.
Los nuevos terroristas en América Latina son los que luchan por el agua y por la tierra.
The new terrorists in Latin America are those who are fighting for white water and earth.
Realmente nada ha cambiado desde la colonia española.
Really, nothing has changed since Spanish colonialism.
Supuestamente estamos más civilizados,
Supposedly, we're more civilized,
pero nos hemos vuelto más salvajes
but we have become more savage
por el consumo,
by the consumerism,
por el oro, la riqueza
by gold, because of gold and the riches from it,
y el capitalismo norteamericano.
and North American capitalism
Es salvaje,
is savage.
no respeta
It does not respect
ni la vida,
not life,
ni el agua,
not water,
ni la tierra,
not the
ni
earth,
la naturaleza.
not nature.
A nadie.
It doesn't respect anybody or anything.
Se está recolonizando el mundo
It's recolonizing the world
por el gas
for gas
amazónico,
in the Amazon region,
por el oro que está en la cordillera del Cóndor desde el Ecuador, desde Colombia, Ecuador, Perú y Bolivia.
and for the gold that is all along
Es
the Andes
interminable el
border
oro.
from Ecuador all the way through Colombia.
No se termina el oro, hay oro.
Then it appears that gold is not ending, it continues on.
Los españoles mataron muchos millones de antepasados míos, de incas,
The Spanish killed many of my ancestors for gold.
por el oro. ¿Dónde hay oro?
Where is their gold?
En los anillos, en
In
los
the
collares,
rings,
en la banca,
necklaces,
en la banca,
in the bank,
en la Reserva
in the reserves,
Federal de los Estados
Federal
Unidos
Reserve of the
y las
U.S.,
reservas económicas de las grandes corporaciones.
and the reserves of the grand
Y eso se
corporations.
tiene que sacar de las montañas, de las tierras de los indígenas.
And that gold has to be taken from the mountains of the indigenous people.
No importa si se contamina con mercurio,
It doesn't
no
matter
importa
if it's polluting with mercury.
si se pierde la agricultura,
It doesn't matter if agriculture
no
is lost.
importa si las generaciones van a ser estériles o enfermas.
It doesn't matter if the next generations become sterile.
La corporación, la Newmont es una parte, hay grandes corporaciones
Newmont is a part of those
que se
big
están peleando
corporations.
entre ellas mismas por llevarse los recursos primarios, estratégicos de América Latina y de todo el mundo, en África, Centroamérica, el Medio Oriente.
Corporations that are working to extract the resources of Latin America, of Africa, of throughout the world.
They're fighting themselves.
And they're fighting, sorry, they're fighting.
Esta es la bandera de Perú.
This is the flag of Peru.
Tiene un árbol
It has a tree
que significa la riqueza natural, la selva amazónica.
that represents the richness of the Amazon.
Tiene la vicuña o la llama
It has the vicuña or llama
que representa nuestra riqueza animal.
that represents our wealth, animal wealth.
Y tiene abajo un cuerno con monedas de oro.
And then it has a cornucopia with pieces of gold.
Y esto se está peleando, el capitalismo salvaje está peleando por eso.
And the savage capitalism is fighting for this.
No es un asunto solamente de riqueza para nosotros.
It's not just about riches.
Nosotros no
for us.
queremos oro. O es el agua o es el oro.
It's the water or it's gold.
Y el pueblo ha dicho no al oro, quiere su agua.
And the communities have said no to gold.
Porque
yes
de
to
su
gold.
agua se saca el maíz, se saca la comida, se sacan los pastos, los animales y se bebe. Es la vida.
Because from the water we get our corn, we get our crops, it's what we drink, it's our life.
Y ahí viene, queridos compañeros, amigos,
And from that comes, my dear
la
friends,
resistencia del pueblo indígena.
the resistance of the indigenous
América
community.
Latina es grande, está ardiendo. Va a haber en los próximos 10 años, va a haber una lucha encarnizada, fuerte.
Latin America is very large, and there is resistance bubbling up, and then within the next 10 years, there's going to be something big.
Desde Centroamérica, desde México,
From Central America, Mexico,
pasando por el Canal de Panamá,
going through the Panama Canal,
Colombia con las riquezas que tiene en sus montañas,
with Colombia with its riches,
Ecuador que tiene mucho oro y Perú muchísimo oro y petróleo y cobre,
and Ecuador and Peru that have a lot of gold and a lot of
Bolivia y todo va a ser una zona de resistencia.
and Bolivia, all of that is going to be a zone of resistance.
Y ahí hay una respuesta a nuestro amigo.
And here's a response to our friend.
El día de la masacre estuvimos en Cajamarca.
The day of the massacre, we
Hablé
were
con
in
nuestro
Cajamarca.
amigo Jerry. Nos íbamos a Cajamarca una semana antes a organizar la resistencia del pueblo indígena.
So with Jerry, was in Cajamarca, and we were there organizing the resistance in Cajamarca.
Yo no voy a mentirles a ustedes, no les voy a mentir. Yo tengo una militancia revolucionaria
I'm not going to lie to you. I have a revolutionary stance.
con tierra y libertad,
I have a relationship with land and liberty.
que es el movimiento que está luchando en Cajamarca. Esa es una línea.
It is the group that is fighting Cajamarca. It's one of the lines.
La otra línea revolucionaria son los compañeros maestros de Patria Roja.
The other group, another group is the line of the teachers, the red line of teachers.
Y la tercera línea, el tercer poste, la tercera columna,
And the third column
es el movimiento social,
is the social movement,
organizado.
organized.
Hemos entendido
We've understood
que estas tres fuerzas
that these three forces
tienen que ir en un solo camino
have to go in one path
para la resistencia
for resistance
y la lucha.
and the struggle.
De la tierra,
For the land,
del agua
of the water,
y de la vida.
and of life.
El movimiento social, ¿cuáles son las perspectivas del movimiento social?
So what are the perspectives of the social movement?
Hay tres perspectivas del movimiento social.
Disculpa, hay tres, ¿eh?
Tres partes. Tres
Okay,
cosas.
there are three parts to the social movement.
El movimiento social estamos empujando a una nueva legislación en el Estado peruano, en el Congreso.
So we're pushing some legislation in the Peruvian Congress.
Pero hemos apuntado a más. Queremos un evento latinoamericano de los gobiernos,
But we're also pushing for an event of all the Latin American governments,
que los pueblos y los gobiernos discutan una nueva legislación
where the communities and the government debate new legislation
sobre el asunto de la explotación extractiva de los minerales en América Latina.
over extractive minerals throughout Latin America.
Ese es un instrumento legal,
So that is one of the instruments we're using,
en la que se respeten fundamentalmente tres puntos:
in which where we respect 3 points.
las cuencas y fuentes de aguas originales,
That the rivers and streams and the sources of water,
las cuencas de agua,
¿cómo say it again? The watershed, yeah, thank you.
las fuentes de agua, número uno, que se respeten los territorios ancestrales.
That the ancestral lands are respected,
No puede venir el imperialismo norteamericano
where U.S. imperialism cannot come
a destruir toda una herencia,
to destroy all
toda una
of
cultura, lo que nos
all
queda
of
poco de
our
nuestra cultura.
ancestry and a whole legacy of
Y lo
culture.
tercero es que todo el pueblo indígena, todo el pueblo de América Latina lleve a tener un gran evento en que sea una sola representación de lucha en América Latina.
And that we have this large event where there is one single representation of all Latin America.
Ahí está la línea. En el lado de la resistencia,
So that is one line, and then on the line of the side of the
estamos
resistance,
trabajando
we're working
por elevar el nivel de lucha del pueblo.
to raise the level of struggle, of fight above the community.
Lo que hemos visto en el video
What we saw in the video
es parte de eso,
is part of that,
es parte de un proceso de concientización.
a process of consciousness raising.
En el lado más emocional,
In the side, the more emotional side,
tenemos que preparar a nuestro pueblo para algo más fuerte que se viene.
we have to to prepare our communities for something more harsh that is coming.
Lamentablemente eso nos cuesta muerte.
And unfortunately, that will cost us death.
Los asesores israelíes que están en Cajamarca,
Los asesores.
asesores israelíes que el imperialismo ha traído,
Okay, the Israeli asesores,
militares,
the military folks that are there in Cajamarca
no tienen compasión.
do not have compassion.
Si él es un dirigente,
If he is a
hay que eliminar.
head of a community, he must be eliminated.
Si hay una movilización,
If there's a mobilization,
hay que matar a 10 o 20
we have to kill, they have
para
to
que ese
kill
movimiento tenga temor.
10 or 20 people so that that movement has fear.
Se ha pasado de un terrorismo psicológico
We move from a psychological terrorism
a la eliminación física de los mejores luchadores.
to the physical elimination of the best fighters.
En ese terreno, cuando un dirigente está dirigiendo, tiene que tener un segundo.
So in that case, when
Un
someone,
segundo dirigente.
dirigente,
Un líder,
gracias. A leader, he has to have a second leader, kind of second in command.
Y tiene que haber otro tercero.
And there has to be a third one.
Porque el primero
Because the first
o va a morir
was going to
o va a ir
die,
preso.
or is going to be bitten.
Y el segundo tiene que asumir la
The
responsabilidad.
second has to take
Y si así sucesivamente.
and
La resistencia no va a terminar.
the resistance is not going to end.
Actualmente,
Currently,
el gobierno de Ollanta Humala, el gobierno
the
de
government
Ollanta Humala ha suspendido
has suspended, so the Peruvian president has suspended
la implementación práctica de la corporación Newmont en Cajamarca.
has suspended the Newmont mining moving forward in Cajamarca.
Y nos estamos preparando para que el 2016
We're preparing for 2016,
nosotros podamos hacer una propuesta grande.
that we can do a big proposal.
Primero, que se revise todas las concesiones mineras.
First of all, that we review all of the mines,
El tipo de contrato
the type of contract.
no se puede entregar a una corporación territorio enorme para la explotación.
We cannot turn over to a corporation a huge amount
Pero
of
los
territory
gobiernos
for
corruptos lo han
exploitation.
hecho.
But the corrupt governments in the past have done that.
Fujimori,
Fujimori,
Alan García
Alan Garcia,
y hoy Ollanta Humala.
and today's president.
Acaba de conversar con Obama
He just talked with Obama, the current president,
para producir entre Perú y Estados Unidos
to produce within the U.S. and Peru
un nuevo tratado de libre comercio
a new free trade agreement
que no favorece a los campesinos, que no favorece a las organizaciones.
that does not favor the companies
Que favorece
organizations. It favors
en el 80% de las grandes corporaciones para que entren al país y se lleven todos los recursos.
and so that corporations can are favored and can come in and do a lot of exploitation.
Esa es nuestra realidad, esa es lo que está pasando en la patria, eso es lo que está pasando en Ecuador, en Perú, en Bolivia. Acaba de terminar una reunión.
So that's what's happening in Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. There was just a meeting.
Perú es aquí y Ecuador es aquí.
Here's Peru and here's
Y aquí hay una enorme cordillera.
And then there's a big mountain range.
Esa se llama Cordillera del Cóndor.
Cordillera del qué?
Del Cóndor.
Okay, and that's the Condor mountain range.
En esa cordillera está todo el oro.
And within that mountain range is all of the gold.
Por aquí está la Newmont y la Chevron por ahí.
Newmont is on one side and Chevron on the other.
Están ahí, todos se van a ir. Y estamos preparando, los indígenas de estos dos lados se han reunido.
And so all the indigenous people on both sides of us have come together.
Un solo plan,
One single plan,
una sola dirigencia,
one single leadership,
una sola propuesta
one single proposal,
y un solo puño
and one single fist
para golpear al imperialismo. Vamos a resistir,
imperialism,
aunque moramos.
even if we die.
La patria no se vende,
Our country, we do not sell it.
la patria se defiende.
We defend our homeland.
El agua
The water
y la vida
and the life.
se defiende con ella.
We defend with our lives.
mentioned Israel was in there. I missed that, please. What did Israel have to do?
Asesores militares, paramilitares, que entrenan a los grupos paramilitares, que reprimen al pueblo son ya no es como en Vietnam, ya no es como en Salon, que iban directamente a la escuela de
He's saying that those who are training the paramilitaries and the folks like are from Israel. He said it's no longer like in El Salvador, Guatemala, where people went to the School of the Americas. Now,
Israel's
soldiers are
all
with
over there. They're in almost every police department in this country.
So I learned by talking, so I apologize for having so many questions. I was asking what makes South America more vulnerable to the atrocities that you were surprised to see there? Is it the government? Is it the media? Is it a combination?
I think it's 500 years of history of a country that has been, I mean, the Spanish came for gold and have been extracting resources, not just gold, but all kinds of resources. And the fact, I mean, I work on immigrant rights issues, and the fact that people, Harriet actually just sent me a great article about this is the name, he talks about the right not to migrate. A lot of people don't have that right, and that's not just an issue. Free trade agreements are exacerbating it now, but that's part of a whole long history where communities have not been able to fully decide how their resources are used or how things are invested. And it's a whole lifestyle of the northern countries where we're dependent upon that kind of cheap resources and cheap labor. And so while there's not to say that there's always been resistance, and that resistance has held strong and done that, but the reason we're seeing, again, it's also though not just unique to Latin America. Again, we're seeing that same kind of resource extraction happening here. But the levels of poverty are much higher there because, and we're seeing that increase in this country too. We're seeing the gap increase. But
Well, there's open pit mining here. The indigenous and Navajo have been fighting Newmont for a good number of years. We have mountaintop removal for coal. I mean, we can look right in our own backyard. We got fracking, and the people are hollering about water here, and with the floods, you know, who knows what we're going to find in our drinking water.
And I think in Latin America, there's the history of Spanish colonialism, and then U.S. policy since the 1823 Monroe Doctrine has always been that we assume Latin America is our backyard, and we will take responsibility for who can enter and who can do work. And that just is perpetuated. There's a new show on PBS called Latinos Americanos, and it was started on Tuesday, and it emphasized, I'm going to use not their word but mine, the disposability of Latin Americans for our needs, whether we need them here or we need them there. We need them here, we bring them in, we don't like them, something happens, send them home. There's no relationship, there's no loyalty, and certainly there's no understanding of what Ramon was talking about in terms of a relationship of human beings to the earth. We just don't get it, and we don't try to get it.
And it's not only Latin America. It's wherever there's desperate poverty and ignorance together. Eastern Europe, Africa, Tibet, a lot of other places are being assaulted the same way.
Buena pregunta.
good question.
Lo hace vulnerable primero porque hay un rezago fuerte del proceso colonial.
So
Son rezagos del proceso colonial.
it's vulnerable because there's a whole residual from the colonial period.
Esa es una.
That's one.
Número dos, no ha habido un proceso democrático
There's not been a democratic process,
real
true one,
en que la sociedad civil
and where civil society
tome realmente la conducción y conciencia del potencial de los recursos.
where the local communities are able to have control and responsibility for local resources.
Otro de los aspectos es, hay grupos todavía de poderes locales,
And the other is there's still local groups of control,
nacionales,
national,
que sirven como cabecera de playa. Sí,
that serve as kind of,
Beachhead.
yeah, the beachheads for the U.S.
y lo otro es un proceso de desculturización,
And the other is of deculturalization,
que el modelo de sociedad occidental
which is the model of Western society,
ha llevado a América Latina
has been taken to Latin America.
sobre el desarrollo, sobre la civilización,
Development and civilization,
la concepción de la nueva civilización.
the concept of new civilization.
Ese es uno de los problemas centrales de por qué América Latina está vulnerable.
That's one of the central components of why.
Y otro componente son los gobiernos corruptos.
And the other is corrupt governments.
There's one other factor that, in terms of answering your question about the tradition in Latin America or heritage or whatever, and that is impunity. The people in power in Latin America feel like they can do whatever they want to whomever they want in order so that they can line their own pockets. Unfortunately, I think we have the same thing here. It's just a little more subtle. But in the case of the international corporations that come to Latin America, they wine and dine the powers and the elites to be able to secure the rights to go into communities. And where I live in Guatemala, they came in with a declaration that all of the leaders in the communities around Lake Atitlan, where I live, had agreed that this company from Canada could come in and mine the hot water. I mean, the energy from the earth, basically, from the geothermal, from the volcanoes there, right in the backyard where I live. The people are totally up in arms about it. The indigenous leaders are all opposed, but they have something that says that they have the right to do it. They paid off the departmental leaders in the capital. They probably have paid off a lot of the mayors and so on around the communities around the lake. And then they come in and they just do it. They just go ahead and do it no matter what the protests are, etc. So, I mean, I think this is what happens with mining issues, with whatever abuses of the land is necessary in order to extract the resources from the earth. I certainly saw it in Chiapas.
I remember a story that Robin told us last year or so. Just reconciling an example of the history of things is that Cajamarca was the meeting place of the Spanish and the Incas when they first arrived in Peru. And it was the Spanish and their greed for gold that caused basically the conflict there. And the Spanish wanted the gold that were buried in the mountains, and the Incans would not tell them where it was. And 500 years later, we're still, as Europeans, as Anglos, knocking on the doors of Cajamarca trying to get the gold. It's just a continuation of 500 years of history that we're still battling against.
Well, just have to say, it's not just Cajamarca. That's the point. It's happening with various kinds of natural resources all over Latin America. It could be happening in a lot of other places, but that's what I'm doing. Yeah.